Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Before we jump in and get started, please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. We're going to be discussing how to empower and give agency to young readers while exploring tough topics in literature. So first, we're going to briefly introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about our work, and we're also going to share a childhood experience that relates to the work we're going to be discussing today. Francisco, you can go ahead and start.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Francisco Stork, and I write young adult novels. I was born in Mexico a long time ago, as you can see, and I've just finished my 11th novel. One of the things that attracts me so much to the topic that we're going to be discussing tonight is the experiences that I went through when I was growing up. I came from my adoptive father from Mexico, and about 3 years after we came, he died in an automobile accident, and it was just my mother and myself. So, I had to kind of figure out a way to to not be overcome by grief, and so one of the things that we're going to be doing today is looking at ways that young people uh, can do that through literature. One of the things that helped me was that I started writing in a journal soon after that, and it gave me a sense of having something that was my own. So that's a little bit about myself. Monica, how about you?
So I'm Monica Mancillas. I author picture books in middle grade. My picture books include Mariana and Her Familia, The Worry Balloon, and How to Speak in Spanglish. And Sing It Like Celia was my debut middle grade novel. And I was also born in Mexico. I was born in Ensenada, moved to the United States when I was 2 years old, and just very recently moved to the United Kingdom. So big change for me. Um, so there's a lot of me in Sing It Like Celia. The themes that are throughout this book with various characters are themes of loss. And there are various ways that children lose connection with a family member or a parent. As a child, my parents divorced when I was 4 years old, and there were subsequent marriages, more than one, and divorces. And so that feeling of loss and instability was a current throughout my childhood. And just like you turned to journaling, Francisco, music was a big place of solace and a safe haven for me. So, and salsa music was a really big haven for me as well. So, Celia is referring to Celia Cruz, and music is one of the ways that my characters cope with these feelings of grief and abandonment. Okay, so let's go ahead and move to the first slide. All right, so just to reinforce what we're talking about today, we're talking about how to empower and give agency to readers while exploring tough topics in literature. And now we're going to just tell you a little bit about our books. So Francisco, we'll start with your book.
Sure. The book, "The One Last Chance to Live," is uh, my attempt to write about writing. I started at first trying to create like a nonfiction book, giving advice to young writers, and that seemed really boring. So I turned it into a novel. And "One Last Chance to Live" is the story of Nico Cardos, a senior in high school. He lives in the Bronx in a very challenging kind of neighborhood, and he wants to be a writer. He is in his AP class, and his teacher assigns to him uh, to keep a journal. Write 500 words every day, and uh, so the novel is in the format of a journal. It goes kind of day by day, and one of the things that happens to Nico is that he has a powerful dream about a girl that he loved, and who died of an overdose the year before. Her name was Rosario, and in the dream, it's his own funeral, and he dreams that Rosario is there, and she kind of either beckons him or says goodbye. He never, he can't really kind of figure out what the gestures is. Um, but he decides that the dream is trying to tell him something, and he sets out to find out, what happened to Rosario, who also wanted to be a writer, who was, very bright, who he loved very much, and all of a sudden her life started falling apart until her death of a heroin overdose. And he wants to know whether did she do it on purpose, or or was it an accident. So that's generally what that one life, one last chance to live is about.
It's such a touching story. I had the pleasure of reading it before this event, and I cannot recommend it highly enough.
Thank you.
Um, you're welcome. So, Sing It Like Celia, as I mentioned before, it's about a 12-year-old girl named Salvadora Sanchez, and it opens on the day that her mother doesn't come home. So, she's living with a single mother, and her mother disappears without explanation. And so, she's forced to live with her somewhat estranged journalist, investigative journalist father, and he travels around a lot for work. So, she's now living in a camper van with him while he's working on a story about a woman who is being held for deportation and has been separated from her children as well. And through the story, Salva has to contend with all the anxiety and uncertainty of not knowing what happened to her mother and feeling helpless because nobody's really telling her what the truth is and what has happened. And of course, being a 12-year-old, she also has to deal with all the 12-year-old issues of making new friends in a new environment and finding her voice and her sense of identity and self. And through the course of this story, she, while having to deal with, she joins a band, and there's, like intra band drama and politics that happen there. But she winds up discovering, finding agency in being able to express herself. And that was my way of rewriting my own story in a sense, because I think often children are not allowed to do that, or they feel that they're not allowed to tell their caregivers how they feel. So yeah, that's the basic premise of the story. All right, so we're going to move on to the next slide. And now we're going to actually get into some work. So before we start working, I want to just remind everybody to have something for writing, a pen or pencil and a piece of paper, or if you want to use your laptop, that's fine as well. And we're just going to dig a little bit more into this essential question of giving agency and empowering readers. So let's define each of these key terms. The first one, empower. When we empower readers, we guide them through their own emotional journey with the story and its characters, and leave them with the sense that they too can navigate the difficult emotions in their own lives with strength and empathy. Francisco, you want to tell us about agency?
So agency is very, is very similar to to empower, to being empowered. And um, agency is a character, and by example, the reader kind of um, discovering that they can do something about the challenges that confront them. So that it's not just a passive, you know, I, reception of things happening to you, but finding a way to address them. Sometimes it's an actual way by doing something, but also to keep in mind in agency that agency can also be just a change of attitude. Sometimes the circumstances that confront you are so powerful that there's not much you can do that. And agency in a way is to make sure that your mind does not accept the negative images that are being told to you by the circumstances. Images of you're not worthy, or you're shameful, or you're not good enough because you're poor or whatever. So it's good to kind of keep in mind that agency kind of happens on both levels, both a physical level, to actually try to change your physical challenges, but also kind of on a mental level, in how you see yourself, as not as somebody who is worthy to fight for him or herself.
That's such an important distinction because so often when we find ourselves in these challenging circumstances, there's not a whole lot that we can do about it. And regaining that sense of control over what's happening in your life starts in the mind. So I think that's really an important thing to mention. So I'll just talk briefly about empathy. So, one of the most important things that we as authors can do is allow readers to see themselves in the experiences of our characters in order that they can approach others and themselves with a sense of understanding and compassion. So, we're going to now dive into our texts. We're going to use our books as mentor texts and walk you guys through some exercises. So, we're going to start with Francisco, an example from your book.
So what I will do is I will um, I'm trying. I'm going to read the text of the book, and what I'm reading for it. What I'm reading is really the dream chapter uh, where Nico has a dream about Rosario, and so even though it's a dream and not much happens, just keep in mind as you hear, why is this an example of empowerment and agency, even though he's sleeping and just dreaming. Uh, so it's kind of a just keep that in mind as I read it. And so Nico starts. I want to quickly write down the dream I just had. I was in a closed casket inside the dark, perfumey parlor in Ortiz's funeral home. Then I was floating in the ceiling watching the scene. I was surprised and disappointed that the small room was not even half full. I'd been to funerals for dead kids with crowds spilled over into the street. In the in the front and then in the front sat Alma and her mother together with Noah. Behind them was my father sitting uncomfortably next to Harrison, my mother's boyfriend. Mr. Cortázar was there, next to our school librarian, and Mrs. Longoria. Next to them sat Ruth from my school, wearing a silky black dress and a necklace of tiny white pearls with matching earrings. The rest of the rows were sparsely occupied with kids from school and people from the fish market. And we go to the next slide there. The casket was the same one that Mr. Ortiz used for Rosario, the same casket that he always uses when the bodies are destined for incineration. Who can afford to be buried? No one, I know, and none of the families of the dozen dead kids who've used the casket. Sometimes the casket is open, like for Rosario's funeral, and sometimes it's closed, like when a gangbanger is shot in the face. In front of the casket was a red uh, velvet kneeler, and next to that, a blown up image of my yearbook picture that I hated so much. It was taken the day after my wisdom teeth were pulled out, and I look like I'm chewing a huge wad of gum. I searched to see if anyone was crying, but everyone seemed calm and even a little bored. The only evidence of grief that I could find was Alma blowing her nose with a pink tissue, Noah's red eyes, and Ruth's lowered head. Then I noticed for the first time two empty chairs to the right of the casket. In the funerals that I've attended, empty chairs were placed for the parents or siblings of the deceased who were previously departed from this world. Filled with sudden terror, I began looking for my mother and Javier, my brother. They weren't there. The two chairs were for them. Then things got dark, and I realized I was inside the coffin, and I was unbearably sad because the two empty chairs in the front meant that my mother and Javier had already died. That's when I felt someone lying next to me. I smelled coconut shampoo and knew it was Rosario. She was there to console me for the loss of my mother and Javier, for my own death, for hers. I wanted to embrace her, but I couldn't turn. The coffin was too tight for two bodies. Rosario rose above me. Her whole being was made of rose colored light that was now dimming. She moved her hand in such a way that I could not tell whether she was asking me to follow her or waving goodbye. And then, just before she disappeared, she said something to me that I understood in the dream, but I could not remember when I woke up. What, Rosario? What did you say to me? Um,
Hmm. That's such a powerful scene. And one thing that I noticed that I really think is so important when you're, especially when you're writing for young readers, or yeah, for young readers, is the fact that in the middle of this really heavy dream that he's having, where he's just mentioned something that's so deeply personal to the reader, that he has been to multiple funerals, that he's seen multiple children his age die from gang warfare. Um, and then he mentions, as an aside, this picture that he hates. He hates the way he looks in this picture. And it's such a, that's something that an 18-year-old would think, right? And so it really keeps us, first of all, in tune um, with your main character and his age and his state of mind, but it also makes it really relatable, because that's the way all of us think. In the midst of all this heaviness, there is still our everyday minor worries and concerns. So I thought that was beautifully done.
Thank you. I think that it was when you're dealing with subjects that are very tough. Um, it's important to have a little humor, you know,
Yeah.
what the humor does, and what those little details about kind of day to day life, like looking at your picture and thinking how ugly it is that it becomes it keeps empathy for becoming pity, you know.
Mm.
So you really kind of like, if you're a young reader reading this, or any reader, you empathize and you understand, but you don't want them to feel sorry, you know. You try to keep the line at that emotion, just the empathy being more of an understanding of what's going on.
Yeah. How would you feel if you were this person and you were experiencing the same kind of thing? Yeah.
Yes.
So, so I want everybody who's watching right now to think back to our essential questions and how this particular text fits in with our goal of creating a sense of empathy and agency for a reader as they're reading through something that is very difficult, a very difficult subject. And maybe you can explain a little bit more about that, Francisco, about how you think this particular example relates to the question.
Well, I think that one of the things that gives us agency is the ability to notice the outside world, you know, and to be perceptive of the things that are happening around us, and not only uh, what Nico is doing is a dream is happening to him, but he's also kind of like, he's also kind of noticing things, and he's trying to understand the relationship of what's happening in that dream to his life, you know. And I think that whenever there is whenever there is something that is happening to us, the agency piece, you know, the empowerment piece is looking for a way uh uh of meaning and connection from what is happening to, you know, to your own life, and to what it's telling you, and to what you and what you can do about it. One of the things that I really like about Nico is that, you know, his agency is kind of subtle, you know. uh, I mean, somebody who pays attention to dreams uh, is already kind of like, is a spiritual person in many ways, you know. Their reality is greater than than it is for a lot of us, because it takes into account uh, the world of the mind. And so and I think that kind of awareness, you know, of what's happening inside your mind is kind of the beginnings of real agency for me.
I find it really interesting that you use this kind of dream sequence in your book, because, as you know from reading Sing It Like Celia, I do the same thing with Salva. She has these nightmares about what's going on, and I wonder if you've used that before in other books, and if you think that maybe um, it's even a subconscious choice on the part of an author to use dreams as a way of um, exploring the state of mind of a character in a way that's more palatable for a reader.
Yeah, I mean, dreams are really I mean, both as an author, and as a reader, but but as an author, dreams give you kind of like a subtle way of looking at something, that's not like hit on. You're not hitting somebody in the face with something, and you let the reader kind of try to figure it out themselves. Um, but I also, I also believe, that as authors, one of the things that we need to learn to do is kind of listen to our voices. Uh, all of a sudden you're writing and you get this idea or you get these images, and you really don't know where they're coming from. But but the more you write, the more you pay attention to them, and the more the more you say, what is this voice, what is this image is trying to tell me. And sometimes they give you a direction to go, in terms of writing, that is very important.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the beauty of journal writing and writing a book in this format where you're journaling, is that you're really letting your subconscious mind explore themes without overthinking it.
So one of the things that if we can do, if we can move on to the like a little practice thing that we can do, um, since we're on the topic of journals. I think that one of the most one of the greatest exercises that as a teacher, you can do in the classroom is to empower kids to write in a journal about themselves. And so I thought that we just for a few minutes we would take a crack at just it's just writing in a journal. And the rules about writing in a journal are basically that you have to kind of know that nobody's going to read it, that nobody's going to read what you write, because that kind of gives you that kind of freedom to say, whatever you want in your journal. And it also kind of does away with the censor that we always have in our mind that tells us, oh, you're not good enough, nobody's going to like it. When you write something that nobody's going to read, eventually that censor disappears. So obviously, if you just take a moment to think about a dream that you've had, or to think about a memory that's important to you, or even just a happening. It doesn't have to be like traumatic. When you think about it, it can be just like your every day. This morning I was coming in. I was in an airport, and I wrote in my journal about how nervous I was that I wasn't going to be able to find a place for my overhead bag. So those are the kind of things that when you write, just become things that you can do, and just for the that are important, but they're not really grandiose. So the idea there, when you write, is not really so much about thinking. It is that as it is about seeing. It's about seeing something in your mind and kind of getting it down in paper. So don't think about it too much. Don't worry too much about grammar. um, just why don't we just take maybe 3 minutes, and if you're in a classroom as a teacher, you can always pause the video and give your students a little bit more time. But for today, why don't we just do like 3 minutes and kind of write whatever comes to your mind, and do it really, really fast without thinking too much about it, right? So I am going to start my watch and time you for 3 minutes. Go. Okay, why don't we stop here and just remember that you can always go back to it later. This is just sort of to give you a little taste of what it is kind of to write without too much thought. Um, Monica, you want to share what you wrote, Monica?
Yes. I thought you said that nobody was going to read it.
That's true.
I joke. I joke. Okay, don't judge me too harshly. I was in a city, maybe the city I first spilled myself into and all over when I was new, still fresh with dreams and unabridged ambitions, and unafraid of that pain we call failure. I had gifts in the car for my mom and Sienna, the two most vulnerable parts of myself, but I lost it. That's as far as I got.
Wow. But you see what there's a level and a kind of a depth that Monica went into in in her little piece, um, that is just so is so valuable. You know, she was able to get in touch uh, with things beneath the surface. You know, and I was it was very touching. Thank you, Monica.
My pleasure. Now we get to hear yours, right?
I was so nervous about keeping time that I didn't write anything. No, but I'll read you just a few pages of what I wrote this morning, just so you get a sense of what it's like. Uh, I'm waiting for the plane uh, to Boston here in LaGuardia. We start boarding for 10. We won't start boarding for 10 minutes, but people are already positioning themselves to be first in line. I'm in zone 6 out of 8. So even though I told myself not to worry, I'm getting really nervous. The worst that can happen is that there won't be any room overhead for my bag, and they'll tag it and I'll get it at the other end. So why do I feel so anxious? And also, why am I getting a little angry at those first class guys lining up? So you can be, you know, it can be heavy and it can be light. There are no rules to writing a journal, and it's all valuable.
And that's very relatable as well. I think most of us who have traveled know exactly that feeling of anxiety over everything. All right. So I think we're moving to the next mentor text. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to read. Now this is towards the end of Sing It Like Celia. So we've already seen poor Salva go through all kinds of hardship and drama, and this is the moment that she, finds agency and a sense of empowerment for herself. Finally, I move, one foot, then the next, until I'm in front of the microphone. You've got this. The audience claps as Betty waves and walks off the stage. Then it's total silence. Bright lights, black sky, blood rushing behind my ears. I look to the crowded benches, searching for any kind of lifeline. Instead, I see Darcy in the very front row, sitting in between Jen and Betty. I feel like running, but I stay rooted. For Marcia, for Angie, for me. I close my eyes and channel Celia. The stage was her home. Now it's mine. I won't give up, not for anything. I step to the microphone. Hey, hi. The speakers squeal as I breathe into the mic. My whole body shakes as I stare at the countless rows of waiting eyes. The kids sitting just behind Darcy lean into each other, whispering. The first song is called Bad Blood. I train my eyes directly on Darcy. It's about when someone hurts you right where they know that you're the weakest. It's about standing up for yourself and telling people it's not okay. Darcy's face is red with something like shame. This song is for Marcia. I glance at Angie, whose eyes are a mirror of everything I'm feeling. Then I close my eyes and take a deep breath and wait for Miles's count-in. The pulse of his drum syncs up with my heart, which has finally found its rhythm. I open my mouth to sing, and it's like I'm channeling Celia's courage. I sing through every song in our set without any hesitation. The band is fire behind me, the audience below us moths to the flame. We channel it all our fears, our anger, our joy, into the music. When we're done, the audience jumps to its feet and claps and yells for an encore. So I sing Kukala, Kukala, Kuka Kukala, que ella sale. And this time, it doesn't bother me that the whole world is watching.
It's so nice. I really, one of the things that I really like about I read that passage before I read your the whole book, and so I really didn't quite have the whole story of the relationships that were going on between Celia and the rest of the girls. Yet, it struck me that just by reading that passage, you alluded to kind of like the backstory, and what I really liked was the fact that even though Celia has some deep things going on in her life with abandonment, and the divorce of her parents and so forth, uh, she's also she's a little girl who's like specifically worried about the relationship with her friends, and that the way that, in a way, all the things that are happening to her, and she's kind of directing at Darcy, some of that, uh, some of the anger that she's felt elsewhere. So, as authors, and what Monica does so beautifully is she focuses on a very concrete situation to allude to something that is greater.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that one of the things when you're writing for a younger audience, and by younger, I mean younger than me, um, is that, I think back to when I was 12 years old, and I wasn't walking through my day constantly thinking about whatever challenges I was facing at home. You're still moving through the world as a 12-year-old does, experiencing, crushes and heartbreak and friendship drama and fear over doing well in school, all of those things, right? And they are, they are the things that are happening in the present for kids. While in the background, you've got the things that are happening at home, maybe the larger issues, the larger anxieties that we don't get to talk about every day. So I think when you are exploring those tough things, you have those tough subjects, you have to interweave real life drama and levity through what's happening on a larger scale with your characters.
Yeah. What do, this scene kind of happens towards the end of the book, right?
Hmm.
And so really, in a way, the agency has been building up to kind of a crescendo, to where
Hmm.
she takes the stage and is able to sing. But what is there anything in the book that you think was kind of a turning point between being kind of a victim and becoming kind of an agent that tries to resolve your own problems?
Yeah, I think maybe I think there were a couple of moments leading up to this, because by this point she's feeling almost a little bit emotionally exhausted and defeated. But prior to that, I tried to expose her flaws, because none of us handle things perfectly. When we're going through challenges, we're flawed. And so as a writer, you have to explore those flaws. And so she takes a stab at grasping at agency, first through conflict with Darcy, where she says something terrible to Darcy in retaliation to the mean things that Darcy has said and done to her leading up to that. And then same thing, with her parents. She lashes out at her parents, and so she stumbles into this, sense of agency, and maybe doesn't do it the perfect way at first. But I think that is the turning point where she finally, is free to speak her feelings and to push back a little bit against the people that are harming her.
That's great. Monica, I wonder if you could lead us into an activity that we could all do that's related to the things that we've been studying.
Yes. Okay. So
Yeah.
we're going to do another mini practice activity. So again, have your pencil and paper ready. So what I want you guys to do is think of a time in your own life when you felt powerless due to someone else's words or behavior. So this can be something that happened a long time ago. It can be something that happened today. It doesn't matter when. Um, But think about what happened in that situation. What did this person do? What did they say? How did it make you feel? How did you respond in that moment? And how did you respond afterwards, a day later, a week later? And if you could speak to that person now, what would you say that might help you to take back your power? How would you maybe rewrite the ending of whatever that difficult moment was for you? And how might you say those things into that to them in a way that would let them clearly know that what they said or did hurt you, and still give them the opportunity to improve? Because that's our goal, is for our character to improve, and the person that has done the harming to improve, and our readers to improve somehow through this story. So we're going to take another 3 or 4 minutes to do this activity, and just again, like with Francisco's activity, try not to think too much about it, just spitball. Okay, so if you need a little bit more time, again, if you're in a classroom, you can go ahead and pause and take a little bit more time to do this activity. But I'm going to invite Francisco to read what he wrote.
Okay.
Touche.
You know what came to mind was when I was a sophomore in high school, I finally got enough courage to ask this girl to this dance, and she said yes, which I was really thrilled. And then on Saturday, the day of the dance, she called and she said that she couldn't go to the dance because her parents had a rule that she couldn't go out with Mexicans. And at the time, when you're 16 years old, it's very difficult to kind of understand just that kind of thing. I mean, what struck me, I think it was I think I was kind of speechless, and I felt sad, and I don't think I had a proper response to her at the time. And now, if I had to do it over again, I think I would try to ask her, if she felt the same way, or why, try to. Uh, uh, I think that even a little bit of anger would have been more appropriate, in those circumstances. Than I mean, the anger for me came later when nobody was around, and a lot of good it did anybody, and then the anger was kind of helpful in that it made me kind of say, well, I'm going to show them. And I remember I was like, I started studying really hard, and went to the top of the class. So, but I guess that was my agency in a way. But I wish I had been able to respond in words, to her a little bit better.
Yeah, I don't know that I would be able to respond well to that today. I mean, that's a tough thing to respond to. Wow, that's heartbreaking. Okay, I'll quickly read what I wrote. He was angry that we were leaving, that I was taking his granddaughter away, the only unconditional, pure love he had ever known. He said something harsh, an assassination attempt on my character. I lashed back, uncensored, unthinking. It stung, for both of us. If I could, I would say I'm sorry, that I understand that what he's feeling isn't rage, but pain. If I could, I would ask for his love, his unconditional understanding. Because that's what I deserve, don't I? Doesn't everyone?
Wow, that's right.
That's those, yeah, those are the moments, right, where you're just where somebody hurts you, but it's not because they're angry, but because they themselves are hurting. Um, okay, so let's recap. We've discussed a lot. So let's just go through our back to our essential question here, which was how to empower and give agency to readers while exploring tough topics in literature. And we're just going to go back over what we discussed at the beginning. So, um, creating agency in a novel, once again, we help our characters to navigate challenging situations by leading them to a place where they and the reader feel they have control.
And we empower our readers, by writing about characters who are able to navigate through difficult experiences, um, with grace and compassion, and courage.
And finally, we create empathy in readers by infusing our stories with our own experiences and helping them to connect our characters' experiences to their own. So I think a lot of what we're getting at is as budding writers, you at home who are watching this or in the classroom, really the first place they say, it sounds cliche, they say to write what you know, but really that's where the meat is because there is always something unique in our own story, but also universal. I guarantee if there's something that you have felt in your life, others have felt it as well. And so that's where journaling or writing down, thinking of the experiences that you have been through and how you could reframe those experiences in a way that would empower you will serve your writing when you're writing about these kinds of subjects.
Yeah, and just the very act of writing, even if it's if when you're doing something for yourself, you're basically, uh, when you start writing, there's probably like a little impulse or a little urge inside of you that is telling you to create something, and that's such a valuable thing to have to feel that you are a creator, and that you can bring something into the world that only you can bring. So listening to that little voice that tells you to create something, even if it's something funny, uh, or something that is not extremely serious. You're really, what you're doing is you're saying yes to yourself, which is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but one of the things that I love about writing is it's not just about finding empowerment for your characters and thus your readers. You really empower yourself. I feel like I get the opportunity to rewrite all those painful moments that I've gone through, or maybe it's not even painful, maybe it's embarrassing, or it can be something that happened that was funny at the time but hasn't aged well. It's great to be able to write through those experiences and give your characters opportunities that you didn't have. It leaves you as the writer with a sense of agency and empowerment.
Yeah. It looks like there might be some questions that some students have that Mia has pointed to in the chat room. So maybe you want to do those before we do the prompts, since we have a little time, Monica.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, is there a book or author that has influenced you? Do you want to start, Francisco?
One of the books that I really love is Lord of the Rings, by Tolkien, which is like it's kind of a fantasy. And I don't write fantasy, but I'm a big admirer of the kind of creation that Tolkien did. He made a the language and created characters. And I think that for young people, fantasy is a really, really good place to start, because it's so much fun to kind of let loose your imagination and create monsters and create, different things. So that book kind of influenced me in how I saw. Not that I would ever be able to do anything similar to that, but it kind of gave me the freedom to invent, and which is really important.
Fun fact, where I'm living in the UK right now is actually where very close to where Tolkien grew up. And so I just recently did the Tolkien walk, where you start at the house that he lived in and you get to walk through the areas that inspired the Lord of the Rings. It's really a lot of
Oh,
fun.
you're so lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, since you started with a classic, I will actually kind of piggyback on that, because it's almost impossible for me to choose one contemporary author. There, as you can see behind me, there are so many amazing Latina authors who have influenced me in recent years, and just incredible books and stories. Um, but I'll go back to the very first book that really captivated me as a young person, and that was Jane Eyre, by Charlotte Bronte. And I think what really captivated me about that story and subsequent books um, was the fact that it started with this very, even though this was centuries ago when it was written and the story takes place, in the 19th century, um, the struggles that this woman goes through of feeling small, of feeling unworthy and invisible, and not beautiful and not worthy, um, felt so relatable to me as a young person. And what I loved about it was the fact that she was so full of power. And she really does, she goes through a lot of struggle in that book, and really does find a sense of empowerment, and writes the story her own way, which I really loved. And I try to do that in my writing. I really like complex characters that are, that have a lot of depth to them and go through a lot of angst and torture before they finally realize that dream. It's like the dream isn't almost doesn't feel worth attaining unless you have to struggle a little bit to get it. So I like that. Do we have any other questions before we jump in? Okay. Which book would you put in conversation with your book? Ooh, Francisco, you go first. I have to think.
Which book would I put in conversation with my book? Is it okay if I pick another one of my books to put in conversation with this one? Because this is um, I wrote The Memory of Light a few years ago, about a young girl who's recovering uh, from depression, and it's really kind of like a story of her healing. And there were a lot of stories about sort of like the downward spiral of depression, and I wanted to write something that was like, it was moving in the direction of healing, even though Vicky had to kind of figure out, uh, whether life was worth living, which is kind of the same kind of question that Nico has to figure out. I think that his quest to try to figure out why Rosario died and how she died, in a way, he's kind of like, he's kind of taking, even if he doesn't realize it, he's trying to determine whether his own life uh has meaning. If Rosario, who had all these things going for her, was not able to find satisfaction in writing, how can he? And all the doubts that you have as a writer, are things that kind of Nico goes through, and he has to kind of overcome, and kind of find the value in the writing itself, that is, apart from the admiration that he may or may not receive from others, which I think is probably like the most important advice that I can give a young writer. And the biggest source of meaning for a writer is just to see it worthwhile, regardless of what happens to it. Of course, you have hopes that it will do good things, but really the act of writing is really worthwhile. And so I think that those two books kind of talk to each other. Uh, uh, I think that I would point Nico to Vicky's journey, and show him, the hope that there is in life.
I like that. I think this was a tough one for me to answer, but the first one that came to mind was Maybe It's a Sign by E.L. Shen, who is a fantastic middle grade and YA author, and also happens to be one of my editors, who I adore. But this book really spoke to me, and I think it has similar themes to Sing It Like Celia, in the sense that it's really about, this 12-year-old kid going through all the things that young kids go through while dealing with some really, really heavy losses in her life. So yeah, I think those two would pair really well together. Okay, so let's jump into some final prompts. So these are prompts that you don't have to work on right now unless you want to, but these are for you to take home and use to continue to work on your craft. So the first one is: use the journal entry you created based on a recent dream, memory, or important event to draft a 1 to 3 page story. In your story, what challenge is your character facing that models what happened in your own experience? How can your character navigate that challenge and come to a place of empowerment and agency? The second prompt is: return to your thoughts on a time when someone did or said something to make you feel powerless. Write a 1 to 3 page story using only dialogue. Have your character tell the person who hurt them how they felt. Have the other person respond. How can you lead them both to a place of empathy and understanding? And the third prompt is: create a character that has some of the qualities in a person you most admire. Describe those qualities, and then write a short story about a situation where your character uses one or more of those qualities to solve a personal problem or help others. Okay, well, Francisco, this has been so much fun. I absolutely loved reading your book and learning about how you approach craft, and how you create stories in which readers can find a sense of agency and empowerment while discussing these really difficult backstories.
Yeah, and it's been a pleasure to work with you, and also so grateful for Kidlit, for all that they do for Latina authors, and the support that they give us, and also for our kids. We do this for you, and we hope that uh, you see yourselves as really great people, which you are.
Yes, and we need your stories. So, get out there and start writing. Use these prompts to get the juices flowing, and we look forward to reading your books someday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.